Timeline this, we're going to kind of talk this up. We're talking about the season itself, and again, it was a crazy season to say the least. I want to introduce everybody here. Again, this is Steve Woodward, Duval County EOC Director. We have Linda Stoughton. Linda from St. Johns County, and some of you have seen John Ward before, but he's Clay County. He's sandwiched between the two. But in this particular season, Clay County really showed up in terms of being impacted by Irma for all the folks living out there, from literally from both forks all the way up to Black Creek and then all the way into the Duval County line. Severely impacted. How many homes were ultimately lost or destroyed?
We had 500 homes that were major destroyed, 1,300 that were impacted by the storm or the floodwaters. It's a staggering
number.
It is.
I mean, there are communities out there that don't have 500 homes in it. You know, I mean, you're talking about wiping out a good community of folks, and it's kind of hard to understand, and especially if, you know, again, I don't know how much everybody's heard at home, but we're trying to break down the perceptions, and the perceptions had always been, oh, Clay County, it's never going to impact them. I mean, it gets rain, we have the flooding, but this time it was a incredible trifecta, 3 events coming together that really did a lot of hit to Clay County, and the trifecta, of course, was the nor'easter. And the nor'easter with the northeasterly winds allowing for the St. Johns River to fill up, followed by the heavy rains, and then finally we really picked up on something else.
They just showed the storm hitting my condo.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, well, we'll be showing some of the video here, and again, this will also be live on news4jax.com, Channel 4. Where do you want to kick it off, Mark?
Well, I just want to, it's great that we've got emergency managers here, because these are the people that prepare for the worst, and we hope for the best. And so what's your perception after going through these storms? Do you think people are getting a better handle on the magnitude and the power of these storms, or are they still kind of taking everything for granted and really not adhering to warnings or evacuations? And granted, it's different from the coast to the inland spots, but let's start in Clay County. You know, this was forecasted to be more of an inland type threat storm with Irma versus Matthew, which was a coastal storm. So were the folks inland in Clay County, do you think that they were prepared, and did they heed the warnings?
So I will say no, not necessarily. I think due to the hype of the storm, I think we had quite a few people move, but I think because of the complacencies that we've dealt with in the past, and I think Matthew kind of assisted with that a little bit. You know, we had Matthew. That was the first big evacuation that Clay County had ever done. Didn't end up producing anything really for us, so I think it was kind of that cry wolf for us. But what really did it for us is when that storm shifted further west and we got the significant amount of rainfall that we've got and the flooding. And that evacuation for those inland prongs, the north and south prong, were later in the evacuation scheme because we didn't have the full picture of that when we pulled the evacuations on.
Yeah, and we're talking a little bit earlier about how Irma's track had this westward biased, and then there was this, oh, it's going up the East Coast, Miami-Dade's going to get crushed, and then we were waiting for the turn, and that turn took 7-8 hours of longer than some of the original forecasts. And you say 7 or 8 hours, how can that make such an impact? Well, it's the difference between East and West Coast. And also the difference, at least in St. Johns River Basin, which is what, you know, Mark, and it was an interesting morning. I'll flash you back to what we were doing here. Mark was live on the air. I was traipsing around parts of Riverside if I could get back and forth over the river, and then through San Marco in my big boots and looking at all these the details of the flooding, which was shocking. And yet I was like, how does this happen? And Mark said, you know what, it's a bathtub. And I said, what do you mean bathtub? And Mark nailed it right on the head, and that was, we had this little exit point downtown Jacksonville. We all love going down there to, you know, see the landing and the lake and Main Street Bridge. It's narrow, but if you go to the Buckman, it's super wide. You go to Clay County, St. Johns County, the St. Johns River is wide, and it just filled with rainwater, filled with the nor'easter winds, and then Irma comes sliding on through that southerly wind and shoves all that water right into San Marco, Riverside, Duval County. How was Duval County impacted in terms of, you know, I mean, we saw the flooding in terms of pictures. Were the impact as great as, what building was it downtown that was so devastating?
A lot of the bank buildings and other large structures downtown, particularly those that have lower levels or have equipment, you know, ground level, suffered a lot of damage. But for us, we do work year-round to prepare people and to make sure that they have a plan, they know their evacuation zones. So I do believe, long-term, the public, our citizens and people who live here and visit here probably are more educated about the kinds of risk we face depending upon the storm.
Right. Now, when it came to Clay County, Matthew was kind of a cry wolf moment because, again, it was a powerful hurricane. It stayed exactly, it shows the difference between a well-behaved hurricane, which was Matthew. We all knew what it was going to do. It all did exactly as it was planned to. But Irma, with that shift to the west, had the big, impact mentally and, of course, the impact that we saw around the area. But for Duval County, did people between Matthew and Irma react the same? How would you vary the thoughts?
The beaches were certainly one of the focal points for Hurricane Matthew, whereas with Hurricane Irma, it really did impact the entire city, the entire county. So it impacted all of our communities, all the neighborhoods. But the river flooding, Trout River, St. Johns River, certainly had some really significant impact in areas that probably had not seen that in a longer period of time.
Right. So let's go to St. Johns County. And again, Linda, wow. By the way, these are questions that are coming into us, and I have a feeling it's just the beginning, but these are questions that are coming towards us on Facebook Live. If you have a question and we can get to you, we'll get to that in just a second. But Linda, let's go to St. Johns County and just talk about the variation between the two storms. There was a lot of differences in terms of the impact in St. Johns County.
So with Matthew, it was a coastal event. We had 7 feet of storm surge at the southern end of our community. 2 new inlets were broke through. We had high winds. We had a lot of wave action, a lot of coastal damage. 1,400 homes impacted with major damage, and 64 homes were destroyed.
Wow.
So it was a coastal event, but it was also a coastal event on both sides with the St. Johns River. We did have a storm surge at Racy Point from Matthew, but then here came Irma on a western passage for us, and it impacted all 4 quadrants and the center of the community with not only storm surge, but high winds, a significant rainfall with the bookends of the nor'easters,
Sure.
and also 3 tornadoes that were very destructive inside our community.
Yeah, and I guess my remembrance of Irma, and at least in Duval County, Nassau County, and St. John's Flagler were the number of tornadic-looking signatures on radar. The one, of course, we all remember is the severe damage we saw out there in southern parts of St. John's County, that condominium.
Summer house.
And again, I would say about 1/3 of the building was destroyed entirely.
It's still under repair, yes.
But of course, I think the great thing was when we heard the reports come in about the many tornadoes that occurred in St. Johns County, and there were numerous from right there near you at EOC, all the way out there towards Racetrack Road, and then extending all the way back down south, there was no fatalities directly related from the storm. So it meant to me that at least people were taking this thing very, very seriously, despite the westward track that we saw with Irma.
One of the things we noticed between Matthew and Irma was the home preparation. More plywood going up, shutters being put in, the increase in our sandbag, usage of the sandbag locations, people preparing their homes. It was unfortunate that we had several families that were in Davis Shores had just moved back into their homes
Right.
a week before Irma.
A week before.
And what they did is they used U-Hauls and trucks backed up, secured their new furniture, secured the homes, and evacuated off of Davis Shores. So they used a lot more family preparedness and home preparedness than we saw during Matthew for Irma. And that's a positive. That's absolutely a positive for our community, that people are taking the time and the energy and working on their family plans and knew that they needed to come back with plywood, sandbags, and whatever other materials they needed to secure those homes.
And again, it is a huge impact because Mark was telling me about the impact of winds right along the coast, and the winds, of course, do die down as they move inland. That's why Clay County, when it came to Matthew, you had some gusty winds, some dock damage, but that was basically it. But along the coast, and especially towards South Florida, Central Florida, the plywood involved for the coastal areas is huge.
It's so interesting when you look at the storm, Irma coming ashore down near Naples, working up the coast. It had a lot of time to unravel and widen out. And we had this one primary rain band come through, setting up the EF2 over southern St. Johns County. If it weren't for that rain band, we wouldn't have got those hurricane force gusts. So it was in that primary band that we got 87-mile-per-hour gusts from Mayport all the way across central Duval, and those hurricane force gusts were reported at the airport as well. So you take that out of that, and you don't find any hurricane force gusts, but yet we see all this damage across the area. And it was simply due to the duration of those tropical storm force winds. And that's something that we need to, I think, as broadcasters convey. It doesn't need to have the stamp of a Cat 2, 3, 4. It can be a 1. It can be a tropical storm, and we get heavy rain or persistent nor'easters, which swells the river.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, one conversation we had going into all this was, and everybody knows if you live near the river or Trout River, and again, parts of Ocean Way, and then back out there towards the coast, is that the St. Johns River this year never seemed to go down. I mean, we usually get the storm to come through, even with Matthew, the tides ran above for about a week, 10 days. But this time it went on for literally 2 months. It wasn't until, I would say, middle of November that we could honestly say that, look, the river had finally kind of receded.
And the water through the river, when it comes through Mayport, it gets channeled through the jetties. The deepening and widening of the river allows more water to go in at a faster rate than it can come out.
Right.
So you get an ebb current going in there at a faster velocity than, or the flood current moves in
comes in
faster than the
faster,
ebb.
right.
And when I was looking at some of the current data, we were seeing like 4-mile-per-hour speeds rushing in there. That's that's the average rate of the Gulf Stream.
And
so
again,
you, in essence, have the Gulf Stream flowing into the river.
And St. John's River right there downtown, if we've seen it between tides, if you've been down to Landing or Main Street Bridge, that water is flowing fast around that little point. And that your point's well taken in terms of that.
We were worried, the Seiche effect, the bathtub,
Right.
when we had these strong winds coming out of the east, pushing all that water in, and then the storm moved to the north and we got that southerly flow. I thought we were going to see a lot more of that water come through, and we started to see that, and that's right when we started to get that crest downtown.
Let's talk about downtown. I was looking at some of the questions here while Mark was, just kind of flashing his back, because, it was amazing to see the flooding. And a lot of people, I don't know, got the opportunity to drive around and see it, but I was just stunned by it. So Angela, she lives out there in the Ocean Way area, and she's pointing out that there are folks out there that, in her mind, still feel like the city needs to come deal with some of the flood problems. I know you're not specifically in dealing with that, but how does the EOC manage, looking at what happened this year and trying to plan for what's going to happen next year?
We work closely with Public Works and with the highways, even with the state, to look at areas that certainly saw significant impacts from either Matthew or Irma. There's some long-term projects for drainage and stormwater management, and we're going to have to continue to do that and look at areas that routinely flood.
Is it important for your group to assess this? I mean, when it comes to the EOC, you get all the reports in, do you compile them and then hand it off to the, who
There's
gets
a lot
that?
of data that came out of both Matthew and Irma.
Right.
Public Works is looking at that and looking at areas that may be more prone to flooding or certainly saw historic flooding. We have to remember and put it in context. So this was the greatest flooding that we've seen in Jacksonville since 1846.
And I want everybody to understand that's actually good news.
Yes.
Because the reality of it is, we've been in Jacksonville, Calford, Jacksonville, call whatever, over the last 150 years, never before. 150 years, never before. And again, it was that unique trifecta. I mean, the good news for the folks in Clay County as well. I mean, when you look at the description you had about these, most people all along the Black Creek, North and South Fork, they know they're going to flood. Mm-hmm. I almost think they relish the thought. Hey, I lived through that flood. 2012, got that one. Debbie, I handled that one. These are major floods that occurred there. But this one was that one. Mm-hmm. This is that one that just topped the chart. And I think the good news is that we won't, hopefully, not in our lifetimes, maybe not in our children's lifetimes, we'll see something that extreme again. But nonetheless, I think the key here is that we have to be prepared for the other types, the ones that are still going to be out there. And at this point in time, how prepared do you think people are? I mean, Linda, you were describing how it seemed like a huge ramping up between Matthew and Irma in terms of people, at least in St. Johns County, getting the message. Do we feel that way in Clay County? Do we feel that way in Duval County?
Yes, I think now that they've experienced this, considering this has been the most impacted storm that's impacted the county, my hope is that they've between what we're pushing out in education and what they've experienced, they will now take it kind of more seriously and
Right.
understand it further, hoping we don't have anything of that magnitude again.
Right.
But I think hopefully that they'll take this and understand the amount of impacts. The one issue that I think we have, though, is this was mainly a flood event for us. So the other 640 square miles of the county, other than maybe some tree debris and stuff like that, didn't have a lot of impact. So it's
Right.
trying to convey that across the county and keep that preparedness up.
I love what you just said, too. In that category of flooding, and that's what I was saying. I think that when it comes to the severity of the flooding, Duval County downtown, beating out Dora flooding by 2 feet, was it 1.5 feet, 2 feet?
Yeah.
That we may not have that category when it comes to a hurricane really decimate the city. But there's still that potential for true hurricane force winds where the eye goes over. We're in
Right.
St. Johns County, 1964.
1964 with Dora,
Yeah, that was an eye that hit Anastasia Island with winds of 110, 20 miles an hour.
110, 20 miles an hour. 32,000 people lived in the community. If that would hit today, it'd be a whole different environment. and
How many
change-
people are in St. Johns County now?
Over 226,000.
So we're 8 times bigger,
Mm-hmm.
just like that. And again, it may have been 50 years ago plus, but the reality of it is that that's the next big threat, I think, to, for Mark and myself, when we ponder through all the tracks and, oh my gosh, did you see that 1894 storm or 1893 storm? Those are storms that did brush the coast, maybe in New Brunswick doing severe damage, but it equally could have happened directly into Duval at the coast. And I think that when it comes to everybody at home, we have to be really vigilant of that each storm is what?
Different.
Uniquely different.
Uniquely different. And so,
Characteristics, personality,
right,
the tracking of it.
tracking
All
of
of
it.
it is, each one of them was different.
Right.
And the last time we had evacuated in St. Johns County was for Floyd
Floyd,
in '99. And we waited for the turn, we waited for the
Right.
turn with Floyd. The same thing with Irma. We were waiting for the turn. Was it going to be on the east coast or the west coast or the middle? And we believe now that residents think that they have actually been hit by a hurricane. Yes, we've had the effects from a hurricane. We've had flooding, we've had storm surge, but we haven't had those sustained hurricane force winds that could have done catastrophic damage to our community had Matthew made landfall as an Atlantic storm.
right. I remember going out seeing the damage from Opal, a major hurricane that hit the Panhandle, and it was stunning. You're driving towards the beach, the coastal areas out there. There was a tree down here, there's a tree down there. It was kind of like what we saw in Duval and Clay County this time around with Irma. You saw trees down, but it didn't look all that bad until I reached within a mile of the beach, and it was a whole different story. In that case, Opal weakened tremendously as it came on shore, and I wasn't even in the ground zero area, which is kind of flooded out to the extent we couldn't get to it. But my point is, that's the real concern I think all of us have.
When you talk about degree, to put it in perspective, for Hurricane Matthew in Jacksonville, Duval County, we collected about 800,000 cubic yards of debris. Now, most of that was
I can't even
vegetative.
fathom what 800,000.
A cubic yard is about the size of a washing machine.
Oh,
That's the way the
wow.
engineers explained it to me.
Yeah.
For Irma, we've already collected about 1.4 million cubic yards. Now, a lot of that is construction materials where people's homes or properties and businesses were flooded, and that has moved out to the street and now been collected. But that's almost twice the amount of debris
Right.
between the two storms.
Which is even more compelling when you got to think about in terms of that, when we look at storms come through, and I think there's a group of people out there, large group of people that remember the combination of Francis and Jean. And these are two storms that went into South Florida, but the damage
Martin
here,
County.
but the difference was the first storm, Francis, really did the damage. Because when Jean rolled around, same kind of wind, same kind of scenario, but the damage was already kind of flushed, if you will. But not this time. Irma really did the number even greater than what we would anticipate from Matthew. Because of the track and the strength of the storm.
With Floyd in '99, I think we learned, I guess the saying is you run from the water, you hide from the wind, because Floyd caused such a huge.
The evacuation became the disaster
It was.
during that storm.
And so we learned from that process, but with this storm, the fact that it was coming up the spine of the state, we saw all of South Florida flooding north, not just into North Florida, but just getting out of the state.
Right.
Is that problematic? How do we change the thought process on you don't need to go to Georgia?
We're getting close to your on-air
Okay.
segment, which will be the topic of
Okay.
Okay.
Every storm is different things. By the way, what Rebecca was just saying, if you're joining us on News4Jax or on Facebook Live, we're going to be going live on News4Jax, which is Channel 4, and we'll be doing that coming up in about a couple of minutes here. So if you want to tune in there, it'll be a brief introduction to what we're doing here, because this is the real deal. This is an hour-long discussion in terms of what we experienced out here in terms of Irma and Matthew. Let's go back to Mark's point here, because I'm reading one of the many questions. Okay. Okay, so the point of it is that the question here from Deirdre was, again, discussing what Mark was bringing up, which is about the trip. What was your experience, Duval, Clay, St. Johns County, when it came to having people evacuate? Mark's point was everybody was coming our way. How did it get played out in those counties?
We saw people in our community early. We had people as far away as Key West coming to St. Johns County. So they were trying to find a place to stay. We saw hotels fill up quickly. We saw people evacuating hundreds of miles instead of tens of miles.
Right.
But for Irma, we actually saw a reduction in our shelter use by almost half of what we had for Matthew.
Really?
So we had plenty of shelter space.
Is that because people really
available.
thought this storm was going inland, we didn't need to evacuate?
I think that is part of it, but I also think after Matthew that people strengthened their family plans and probably used different places to go to shelter, maybe more friends, family, hotels.
Right.
We also were faced with challenges. Evacuating healthcare facilities, evacuated to the west coast of Florida, ended up having to evacuate back.
Wow.
Because of the changing watches and warnings.
Sure, that's right.
So we had that with not only healthcare facilities, but with private residences. They would move to the west coast, and then they found themselves back on the road trying to clear those watches and warnings.
Right.
So it was very difficult for people to find the exact spot to be for Irma.
Right. When it came to Clay County, same story?
Same story. We saw, a lot of folks from South Florida that would have moved into the hotels before we really even started pushing a lot of our evacuations. So the folks that would have gone to a hotel, we actually saw opposite of that. We saw a large increase in our shelter use due to that. But we saw the roads and the areas very heavy because of the South Florida evacuations and the magnitude of the evacuations across the state.
Now, Duval County has all the hotels. All full? Is that how it kind
I've
of
not
played
seen
out?
any numbers about the occupancy, but we certainly know that a lot of people did actually even end up in the shelters who came from the southern parts of Florida and other places in the state. And certainly a lot more people than that moved through here, transiting on the interstates and going north or heading to the west onto I-10. But we had about 3,700 people in our shelters, and that's about what we had for Matthew.
Wow. I would have thought it might have been a little bit bigger, but, I could see it that way. Coming up here in just a few seconds, we'll go live on News4Jax. All right, Tom, Mary, again, the big story here, it's finally over. What a pair of seasons, 2 years in a row. Matthew last year, 2016, this year, Irma, 2017. Who do we have here today?
Well, joining us are three members from the Emergency Manager's Office. We have Steve Woodward, who oversees the City of Jacksonville Emergency Management. Also, Linda Stratton from the St. Johns County Director of Emergency Management, and John Ward from the EOC in Clay County. So these are all people that prepare for the worst, and I think they got us through some of the worst.
Yes, they absolutely did. We're going to look at all three counties in particular, but we're going to kick off this segment in St. Johns County, talking a little bit about, the fact that you had two big threats one year after the next. And in at least Matthew's case, it was a situation that seemed so obvious to St. Johns County. But this year, Irma really did impact you, but in a different way.
It did. With Hurricane Matthew was a coastal event for us. We saw significant storm surge, wave action, destruction at our beaches, homes impacted, and also storm surge along the St. Johns River. With Irma was a westerly storm that impacted the St. Johns River, and we had significant flooding in Hastings and Flagler Estates. I think there's the drone video that we brought along that we'll look at. But we had flooding in those areas that was significant. And we also had areas that received 3 tornadoes. One that was an EF2 and then 2 EF1s that impacted our community that we did not have for Matthew.
And again, the theme, I guess, in St. Johns County from one year to the next is that each hurricane is unique.
Yes.
in terms of impact, which is what we actually had a little bit in terms of what happened in Duval and Clay counties, which was the fact that we had so much flooding, flooding like we'd never seen before. John, Clay County, it's Clay County, don't need to worry about it, right?
Yeah, not now. I mean, obviously, we ended up with 500 homes major destroyed from the flooding, and as Linda spoke, storm was tremendously different. Matthew, we did not get much of anything other than a little bit of wind and some trees down. With the westerly shift and the setting up of the nor'easter prior to the storm coming through, we ended up with catastrophic flooding in both
How many
Doctors Lake.
homes destroyed in Clay?
500 homes major destroyed.
I don't think
13
a lot of people know 500 homes in Clay County were destroyed. And again, it was flooding, not just necessarily on Black Creek, but this extended.
Doctors Lake, St. Johns River, those type areas. A lot of the areas that had never had flooding before. We had 6 feet of water in the intersection of County Road 218 and State Road 21. 4 feet of water across State Road 16 near Animal Control.
We had 4 feet of water in Duval County in a lot of spots that had never seen it before. Steve, tell us a little bit more about Duval County, the flooding, never before.
Yeah, John, that's correct. We had seen flooding that was significant, but not since 1846. That's almost 170 years ago. And certainly the areas that flooded, downtown, Riverside, Trout River, anywhere along the St. Johns, and then including the damage at the beach was certainly significant. We had, as far as households impacted, 112,000 people registered with FEMA after Hurricane Irma. We only had about 3,700 for Matthew. So
Wow.
a lot of people were impacted in our community.
All right, so you've heard from our guests. We're going to talk much more live on newsforjax.com. You could go to the website, or even if you have the app, and just listen to us. We're going to be doing this all the way through 6 o'clock. We'll also be on Facebook Live. We're going to wrap it up here, our live portion on News for Jax, Channel 4, and we'll be live on the other 2 platforms, so please join us for that. Send in your questions as well. News for Jax at 5 does continue on. Tom and Mary will be right back. Okay, so we're going to get some more questions in here. We'll start to go through that.
They go a little past 5:30, but they do need, it was originally planned for half an hour.
Okay.
They have to get the studio ready for 6.
Okay, so what time do we need to stop wrap this up?
5:30-ish, start wrapping it up.
Oh, really? Even this?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I thought we were going a little longer.
About another 5 minutes?
Oh, well, never mind. I was hoping to keep you guys longer because it is very cool
We'll
to
come
see.
back again sometime.
No,
No.
you guys.
Next year to talk about no hurricanes.
All right,
It
that
was a
sounds like a
dull
plan.
season.
We'll talk about the Jags winning the Super Bowl, right?
Ooh,
All right.
Wow.
wow, that's a prediction.
Well, it's that Nate Silver, or Nate whatever, the guy on New York Times. You know, he hits certain ones, but not certain other ones. Anyway, in terms of forecasting, we kind of like him because he actually does some hurricane forecasting as well. And they use very similar probabilistic type models, and it's built into the kind of the catastrophic bonds. And I'm going to ask you a question that's a little bit different than what you might have expected because it just came down. Have you heard any conversations about the fact that Moody's, who's a rating agency, that, you know, if you as a county, whether it's Duval, Clay, St. John's, if you want to raise money, you have to get your bonds rated. And if you're rated low, meaning that they think you're a high risk, you have to pay out a higher interest rate, which costs the county much more money. Moody's just said yesterday that they're going to ask all of their counties in Florida, Texas, Georgia, strangely, I thought that was interesting, to reassess individually to the extent that they need to know what your plan is for the future. Is there any conversation to that extent about what you guys will be doing to deal with the mitigating the future? Any thoughts?
We certainly look at mitigation projects, and that goes with any storm, any presidentially declared disaster. Mitigation funding is available. We're looking at that. A lot of projects are on the drawing board with us to determine if those are the ones we want to spend that money for. So we'll be looking at things as we repair them to do it in a better way.
Right.
And looking overall at building codes possibly, or other things that could impact the community kind of writ large.
You know, we were talking to Linda about the impacts on St. Johns County along the coast, and the fact is each storm is so unique. You get flooding in one situation, you get high winds in the other, tornadoes, and here's a situation we haven't been hit by the coastal winds of a severe hurricane, and that gets back to mitigation in terms of building codes, which are so huge down there in South Florida.
Definitely. I believe it's a whole different set of codes in South Florida versus here as well. But, you know, I think there needs to be contingency plans because these storms, as we've seen, have been getting stronger. We had 6 major hurricanes this year. Not necessarily that they're becoming more numerous, but when they form, they're forming with muscle, dropping 60 inches of rain in Houston,
Right.
and coming through as Cat 5s for 3 days on. We saw all the erosion along our beaches, especially in St. Johns County. They're trying to mitigate that on individual plans with bulkheads. Are they talking about any other long-term solutions? And are they able to use state money to, Irma relief money to renourish the beaches with sand?
So one of the things that St. Johns County did after Matthew was create a separate recovery department and bring in coastal engineers to address the entire coastline, deal with all the layers of government and the permitting and which layer of government can pay for which source. So that question really would need to go to one of our coastal engineers in our recovery department as to the next steps in that plan. But certainly they're trying to move forward, trying to work through FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, Florida Department of Environmental Protection, to make sure that we are addressing all the beach renourishment and restoration issues.
I want to say, John, here we are at Channel 4, and just outside our doors here, there's a community. That community, just recently, the city had decided that it may be best just to buy it all out. Is that something that we might see elsewhere?
Well, first of all, to the Southampton project that's really very close to where we are now. We're working with the residents who live there to determine if they're even interested in this, trying to give them some opportunities. There are several properties there that are routinely impacted, but that's true in other places in the city as well.
Well, that's why I'm asking. Is it are there thoughts that we might actually expand a program like that in the future? If
Well,
this is
here in Jacksonville, we have been in a similar program, severe repetitive loss, where they'll either come in because they have FEMA flood insurance, which is also something I would encourage the audience to
get
kind of review their
get
insurance,
your
look at the
flood
flood
insurance.
insurance.
Even
Right.
if it's not required.
right. I think
Get
that's
it.
we're all learning this. Clay County in particular, I got to believe there's got to be heavy uninsured losses.
There's huge uninsured losses of what we're dealing with, because we had areas that had water that have never had water before.
Right.
They didn't believe they needed the flood insurance, and as Linda said, regardless if you need it or not, if you're not in that high-risk area, it's very cheap. And we work, as Steve mentioned, we work a lot with NFIP and our hazard mitigation grant programs on
What's
trying
NFIP
to.
again? I forgot.
And National Flood
Flood
Insurance
insurance,
programs. And in working with the homeowners individually, we do not have the large communities that want to do it, but working with those severe repetitive loss homes that that would like to go through an acquisition through the federal government and the
Interesting.
county.
That goes through FEMA again, right? I think that was really important that we discussed that, because I think flood insurance personally is, I mean, of all the insurance that I cover at my home, yes, I got the regular stuff, but I think that flood is so important. I live in St. Johns County. I live right there near the beach, but not on the beach. But I'm close enough to know if a Category 4 hurricane comes in, the old rule in the Gone family was, you take the kids, see your mom, go live there for 6 to 10 months, and maybe next year we'll have a house back. Because the Category 4, right?
Yeah.
Terrible.
Oh, yeah.
No,
I never want to live through one.
no, I don't either.
You know?
I have goosebumps thinking. I don't even. I've seen the damage. I have no desire. And I'm a weather chase or, to whatever extent. Mark and myself, we would chase a hurricane or tornado if we felt it was okay to do so, but you don't touch those. We have 1,000 questions here, and I think we should go through them. And these are the questions that are coming from Facebook and from News4JAX.
Yeah, quickly, one viewer was asking about the kind of ocean pattern that we're in is during this past hurricane season. Was it La Nina, El Nino? We were like what we call is like a neutral La Nina. So there was the colder waters in the Pacific, which alters the winds, and typically that can kind of enhance the hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin by reducing shear. Usually the reverse of that, the warmer waters or El Nino will create more storms in the Gulf during our wintertime, but it quells the hurricane season.
There's exceptions to that, and of course there was that big one in 1992. It was an El Nino year.
With only 6 storms.
6
One of
storms,
them,
and
the
very
A1.
first one, the very first one, Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah.
And that changed it all for everybody. I mean, in terms of what we do in the state of Florida. We lost our insurance. Remember, all the insurers left the state.
Citizens was created.
Citizens, the fund from the state, we all contributed to it.
new building
How's
codes.
that working
Building
in
codes.
terms of, do you think the fund is working in terms of what you understand?
Yes. It helps fund our programs. I think like anything, there's always can be improvements to it, but I think a lot of our counties all get benefits from the funds that can assist us in preparing
Sure.
our programs and preparing the communities for that.
Steve?
I think the big issue really does come back, at least in regards to hurricanes, to the flood insurance, and making sure you have that, and you have good homeowners insurance or whatever else you might need. The FEMA benefits for a household are not that significant. I think it's $33,000 is about the max you
Maximum.
would ever get from FEMA.
Right.
That's not going to make you whole if
No.
your home is.
Are you kidding me? No.
No.
Get a tiny house maybe, but that's it.
The residents really don't understand. We learned this through Matthew, and we saw it again in Irma, the difference between homeowners insurance and flood insurance. They
Right.
believe that their homeowners insurance will pay if they have a flood.
Right.
And it's very much a surprise to them that it doesn't work that way.
It's a shock to me they don't understand that. I mean, if it drains from the ceiling, homeowners. If it
Correct.
rises from the floor, flood. And that's how you decide your flood insurance. All right, let's go to more questions. I have one here. It says here, talking about storm surge maps and evacuation. Anything changes in your mind based upon what we've had in the last 2 years?
It does for us in St. Johns County. We worked several years ago with the state and the Regional Planning Council to develop the new evacuation zones. They're models, they're computer models based on technology out of the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, planners, the state of Florida. Those models had not been tested until Matthew. So we had our first test with Matthew, we had our second test with Irma. Now's the time to take that ground truth information that we have from storm surge, rerun those models, and see if there needs to be any contraction or expansion of the evacuation zones based on what we know now is science.
So, in other words, I love everything you said there, because you're basically saying we hadn't had the opportunity to test this because, despite the hurricanes that we dealt with the last 2 years, we went 10, 12 years where the models had gotten great and all this great research had been done, but there was no testing of it because we had not been hit. This year, of course, we get slam dunk, Harvey, even out in Puerto Rico, Mitch, and of course, did I say Mitch? Maria. Mitch was another terrible hurricane.
It was
many
a
years ago.
Guatemala nightmare.
Yeah, 10,000 people died, but we remember those as severe hurricanes. But my point is, I think the nice thing about what you point out, Lynn, is that the models are going to get so much better. We'll be able to do neighborhoods in the future.
Yes.
I think 5 years, 10 years from now, we will be able to decide where the flooding truly will be and maybe save downtown
I
area.
think our models in Duval County really verified what we had expected, based on the science we had just a couple of years ago. However, just today, we talked to the Weather Service. We're going to sit down with our good friends out there who support us year-round
Right.
and look at the storms, and look at the impacts, and ask that very question: is there anything that we need to tweak and refine?
Excellent. So this was from, I forgot who it was, but it was just a great question coming off Facebook Live. Go ahead.
Basically, the viewer was asking here, is there any talk about making higher barriers around some sections of the city on the river, such as downtown, San Marco, and Riverside?
Yeah, we're looking at any possibility from the mitigation perspective. It's kind of hard to do those really large projects. They're very expensive, but we'll look at everything, and we'll look at any opportunities. The first thing we're trying to do is get things repaired that were damaged from both storms, and get the beach back up and running, and get the pier back to where it should be. But we are, as we do those projects, looking at mitigation with anything we do.
I think going forward, it's hard to make changes to what's existing, but going forward, maybe different codes or different ways of protecting the shorefront.
I think the other thing is that if there's ever a super severe hurricane here, something we have not seen in over 100 years, and there have been in the past. I mean, people go, oh, it's Jacksonville, never hits here. Not true. We, in the 1800s, and you said the guys of the National, or the gals too, the National Weather Service, all of them are fully aware of the history of Jacksonville going back 18, 17, 1600s. And those are tough years. There were some very severe hurricanes hitting Nassau County, Camden County, Georgia. Again, this is representing Florida here, but we know you guys up there in Georgia were impacted as well. And I think from the future, we want to use mitigation for the small things so we could get right back on our feet again.
Yes.
But it's that big one, there's only a certain amount we can do, other than to make sure our insurance policies are up to date and ready to go.
And stay informed and be prepared.
Yeah. Is there anything, we've got a couple of seconds left, is there anything you guys would like to kind of communicate based upon either what you heard here or?
I think, as Steve and Linda both said, is just continually prepared. I mean, we're at the end of hurricane season, but still to always be prepared, to keep your insurance up to date, be familiar with your insurance. We saw a lot of issues of underinsured, people
Right.
not keeping up on that. So just being prepared, and then when we come around next year, there's no wood here, but hopefully we
Yes.
keep our fingers crossed and not go through this again. But just to always be prepared and work with your local communities. So.
Sounds great. Basically, everybody feels the same way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as a footnote, our Jack's Ready app, you can go to jacksready.com and get that mobile app. We are instituting a new public alert, public notification system. We've changed from one company to another. So people need to go online, jacksready.com, and re-register for public notifications and be prepared year-round.
I think the apps are the future. I mean, we have all our apps here at Channel 4. And the future for all the individual counties, when it comes to, you said registration, man, that is so important. There are so many folks who are classified of needs individuals.
Yes.
Individuals that need some extra support.
Yes.
People that need to be picked up and taken to a shelter, or just need to be, investigated upon to make sure that they're safe during the storm and after the storm. Apps will provide that, but I know yours is building up. You just say you got a new vendor, that'll be great. In the future, 5-10 years from now, I think this opportunity between getting from you, the government, if you will, down to the individual is going to be a quicker, more easier. I'm hopeful, is what I'm getting.
And we're glad to close the books on the 2017.
Yes, we are.
We are, and with that, we'll wrap it up. Again, Steve, Duval County, John Clay, and Linda from St. Johns County. It's great to have the EOC chair. What are the titles here?
Directors.
Oh, okay, directors. You got
The
it.
board of directors.
Thank you.
I don't want
you.
to see you guys again
No.
until
No.
maybe
End
a
of
couple,
hurricane
3
season.
years out. A couple, 3 years out.
And I'd go 10.
All right, I love that.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming on by.
Thank
Mark
you.
Collins, again, great job.
Thank you.
Rebecca Berry did an awesome job as well.